this is John Patrick Hickey. We are talking about success, what it is, what it isn't, how it affects you. And we've talked about change, changing yourself, how by changing ourselves, being that constant learner and grower, that we can change the lives of others by helping others see that there's something better out there, not by attacking the negative things, but by showing the better things. And then, as I said at the close of the last video, there's that ripple effect that goes out. And that's what I want to talk to you about now, about changing your world. Changing the world seems like a mighty big proposition, doesn't it? How strange to think that we could change the world. You think, well, nobody can do that. Well, people have. And many times it's been to the negative. When you think of how culture has changed over the last several generations, and not necessarily for the good, then you can see how these influences happen. What happens is that people start changing the way that they believe, the way that they function. It's not an attack on other people, it's a personal thing. They start changing the way that they teach, the way that they give information. It's a slow and steady process that continues on. When, I grew up, like I said, I grew up in the 60s and part of that generation. Now that generation is pretty much ruling the world, and you can see the mess we're in. And that's because a lot of people from back then held to some of those beliefs that we held back then. And that about being our own selves. It was a very selfish, very self-centered time. And that selfishness and self-centeredness changed. And another element that happens, and you'll see that in government, especially our government today, and you can see that amongst other people. You see it on an individual level, possibly in your own life. There is this massive phenomenon that comes on that you eventually become the thing you hate. It happens every time. People who hate people, who have abused them, become the abuser. People who have a parent who has been a severe alcoholic, or someone who has been very abusive to them, tend to be alcoholics and abusive. And you become that type of a person. I see it happening all the time. When you hate the government because of control and censorship and the oppression of people, what happens? You become a government of control and censorship and oppression, because you become the very thing that you hate. The thing is to help people to not focus on those negatives, to focus on becoming something bigger, more positive, more growing, encouraging other people to be what they can be. That's where Christian character principles come in. That's where we have to understand what it means to live a truly successful life. A successful life that encompasses everything that we are, what we believe, what we do, what we say, how we live, how we earn our money, how we give, how we react in our families, everything. It's all is encompassed, and that's what makes a successful life. And when we start embracing that life, then we start changing the world. And there is another element to this that is very, very important. Matter of fact, it's so important that the next set of videos are all going to be focused on this element of changing our world. Because that is that when people become success-minded believers, people who become solid in the positive elements of living a Christian life, go into areas that we have long since surrendered, This is where true change happens. We look at the government, you look at the courts, you look at the arts, you look at movies, you look at businesses, and you see so much corruption and so many things that are wrong. And you think, how did we end up like this? How did the moral character of our country fall so far? Well, you can go and you can blame this element, you can blame that group, you can blame this type of thinking. The fact is, we, those of us who claim to be believers, who claim to be those influencers for good, for Christ, we gave it away. It wasn't taken from us, we gave it away. Some type of thinking of being separate, separating from other people. We decided that we were going to have our own groups, that we were going to have our own businesses, we were going to have our own schools, we were going to have our own organizations where we pulled away from all the people who are around us. So it was like us and then no more. And then we started in that, we started separating those. That it was my group that had this, or school or organization. And it even went into the churches, because churches were the organizations. That, you know, my group did this, your group has to go over there and do something else. And in consequence, we lost everything because we pulled ourselves away. We are to be a light in the world. We are to be salt. We are to be out there changing the culture, not separating from the culture, not hiding from the culture. Jesus didn't hide from those who are around him. He changed them. He went and made changes to people. And the early church, what was the greatest accusation against the early church? They were accused, these people are turning the world upside down. Who do we turn upside down other than each other? The world doesn't even pay attention to the church anymore because they've become irrelevant on many stages. We don't need more laws. We need more Christians on the courts who can face laws, not making Christian laws, but upholding true justice, doing what is right, and not being corrupt, not being swayed by a political persuasion, but holding to true justice. We need teachers who are going to teach truth, who are going to teach proper history and teach truth, not in separate schools, but in the public schools. Well, you say, well, you can't do that because the teachers' union and the teachers and the school boards, and well, then get Christians on the school boards and in the teachers' unions. You see, that's just it. You have to be people who get out there and are involved, who become politicians, who become business owners, who become the people of influence that we talked about before. This is what our responsibility is. We're to get out there and transform the world. And you're never going to do that if you keep hiding, if you keep pulling away and wanting to be separate and wanting your own little group. The worst thing that has ever happened to the church is what is called the megachurch. These huge churches that pride themselves on thousands and thousands of people who come and no one does a thing. That everybody has a big show, light show and music, and I'm not questioning their commitment to the Lord, but I will say that this is not what God has called for. This is not helping anything, because those big mega churches with all of those people, what's the difference in their communities? I don't see the difference. Where's the difference in our nation? We have more mega churches than any place in the world. What does that mean? It means nothing, other than a lot of people go to these things. But it should mean something. We should be the people who are turning the world upside down. I think that the small community churches are the ones that cause the most changed because the change that happened was not in those buildings, was not inside of those ministries. It was in the community itself, in helping people in the community itself, in making changes and being part of everybody else, being that influence within the community that's out there, being the example that's set out there. You can change the world. It all begins with you. Thank you for being with me through this series of videos. And as I said, over the next series, we're going to look a little closer at changing our world. But for now, for the Growth Center, this is John Patrick Hickey, and I want to encourage you to pursue your purpose and do change your world.